All right. I have a special treat today. Part 2 of Holy, Holy, Holy. It's called Sanctuary. And my goal today is to preach the best sermon you've ever heard. All right, let me clarify. No, that's not true. The best sermon you've ever heard on Ezekiel 11. All right. It's also going to be the worst sermon you've ever heard on Ezekiel 11. I understand. That's my goal today. Ezekiel 11 is an amazing text that I think the Lord has a word for us in this kind of moment in the life of our church. So we're going to dive into Ezekiel, which is on page 711 in the Coffee House Bible. And we'll look at Ezekiel 1, which sets the stage for Ezekiel 11. And I'm going to try to do the best and the worst sermon you've ever heard on Ezekiel 11. So Ezekiel's a weird book. We'll have to dive in to understand what's going on here. But before we get there, let's just talk about this idea of sanctuary. Okay? So what's sanctuary? Sanctuary, my mind for some reason goes straight to Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame where he's yelling, "Sanctuary!" And it's this place of refuge and safety. It's a place where, in some cases, like there's protections, or even protections from the laws themselves where they're not enforced. Years ago, I heard about this. This is in Hohenwald, Tennessee. This is the elephant sanctuary in Tennessee. And if you didn't know there was an elephant sanctuary in Tennessee, it's like, why is this in Tennessee? Elephants don't naturally live in the United States. I haven't seen them roaming wild in Tennessee. It's because this sanctuary is actually for elephants that have been basically like used and abused in circus industry and zoo industry. You know, they put on exhibition and they've been made to perform. And this is a place in the United States where those kind of service animals, so to speak, can go and they can have respite and refuge. This is a sanctuary. And they're saying, we're not going to breed you here. We're not going to make you perform here. You're not on exhibition here. This is a place of refuge. My life's been crazy lately. Yesterday, I took Fletcher, and we went to this little sanctuary across from Baptist Hospital at the Wolf River Greenway. Right? It's this place of protection. Strangely, though, there's all these signs that are like, if you fish here, don't eat them. It's like, all right, we're not protecting everything in this area. But there's these areas in my heart, and you probably have some of these too, where you're feeling a need for sanctuary. Like maybe things are moving really fast and you want to slow down. Maybe you're feeling insecure. Maybe you're feeling unsafe. Whatever those kind of situations are, I've got all of those too. And I'm needing sanctuary. I'm needing refuge. I'm needing respite. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the Smoky Mountains with some friends. And it's really amazing. You can go to a place and you can experience sanctuary. And you can be with people and you can experience sanctuary. But what I have found, especially in the last 6 months, is that even when I'm with like my people, and even when I'm in a place, the problems are still there. And it's not necessarily a problem with the place or a problem with the people. It's just like whatever is activating my insecurities, that sanctuary isn't quite enough. You know, I can be at a fireside overlooking the Smoky Mountains and I can still get a call for health complications that are hitting my parents. Like it's still there. You can go to a hospital, and hospitals are places of sanctuary. They're places of healing. They're places of peace. But if you've ever sat in a hospital, you understand that, like, this isn't sanctuary. It's one of the most uncomfortable places, and particularly for patients and for their families, it activates all kinds of insecurities. Maybe you're needing sanctuary from something. I bet you are. I know I am. But I also know we are. We're a church where people and place are really important. Oikos means home. People plus place equals home. And somehow the problems show up even when people and place are right there. We need some kind of sanctuary that's bigger than that. That's bigger than a place, bigger than this place for sure. That's deeper than our people. As great as this community is. And so I've gotten to taste people and place and sanctuary in so many special ways, but I've found that those tastes only leave me hungering for something more. And that's what we're going to look at today, is the one who is more. This series is called Holy, Holy, Holy. And part 1 last week was from the text that introduces God as holy, holy, holy. It was Isaiah chapter 6. And there's one word in all of Scripture that's repeated 3 times, and it's the word holy. And it shows up for the first time in Isaiah 6. It starts repeating, though. Whenever somebody kind of goes into the place of God, they realize that God is totally different. He's transcendent. He's immense and wonderful and awesome and terrible and terrifying and good and loving. And it's just so much more than you can imagine. He is holy, holy, holy. And what Isaiah shows us is that God is actually able to be encountered. He can be through visionary experience or through a prayerful experience. You can be you can experience like a gateway into the divine realm. And when you go there, things get wild. Things are wild today in our text in Ezekiel chapter 1 through 11. And so we'll kind of dive in. But there's this tension that goes on in Ezekiel. So what I want to do is really introduce Ezekiel 1, talk about how awesome and holy God is, and then I want to explore some of the tension that's there in the book itself. Some of that tension gets resolved in ways that are really needful. And I think the Lord has a prophetic word, not just for the time of Ezekiel, but for the time and the place and these people right here. So I hope that you'll kind of move with me through a pretty weird book and just sort of embrace the weirdness. We're not going to be able to talk and kind of make all of that not weird. It's just going to stay that way. By the way, can I just say, part of the sanctuary was your barbecue. If you ever need a sanctuary in terms of food, just get some chopped barbecue from Stephen Hensley. That was amazing. All right. With Stephen Hensley's barbecue in place, let's dive into Ezekiel chapter 1. This is good stuff right here. Ezekiel 1. In my 30th year, in the 4th month of the 5th day, while I was among the exiles by the Kabar River, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. We're introduced to a man. He's going to be called Ezekiel the priest. And on the 5th month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, not Bougie. He's not Bougie. He's the son of Buzi, by the Kabar River in the land of the Babylonians, and there the hand of the Lord was upon him. We have 2 timelines here just straight off the bat as soon as he opens his book. And the first timeline seems to be really personal. And the second timeline seems to be for the whole people. Is this the 5th year or is this the 30th year? And it's like, right, yeah, both of those. Ezekiel is sitting by the Kabar River on his 30th birthday. And within Judaism, the 30th birthday was the day you finally got your driver's license, if you're a priest. It's the day you fully go into true priest service. It's the day that you're not just in a priestly family for training for the priesthood. On your 30th birthday, you go into the sanctuary. But Ezekiel the priest isn't in Jerusalem. You see where he is. He's by the Kabar River in Babylon. On his birthday, he's in an exile encampment, thinking about what would have been when he could have gone into the sanctuary. You see, a couple of years before, about 5 years before, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came into his hometown, Jerusalem, and he took over the city. And when he took over the city, he put up his own kind of puppet king, King Jehoiakim, and he took out some of the best and the brightest of the land. He left everybody else. He left the temple, he left the city, he left the walls, and then he took these few people, and they were exiles in an encampment. Ezekiel, on his 30th birthday, is remembering what would have been had he actually been blessed by God and gotten to stay in the house of the Lord. This is where Ezekiel opens up. But there's this big question that comes immediately with this visionary encounter where it says the word of the Lord came to him and the hand of the Lord was upon him. And it says that there by the river of Kabar in Babylon, he saw visions of God. So somehow this place and this people doesn't disqualify him from the promise and the presence of God. Let's dive into this vision. He says, look, I looked and I saw a windstorm. The first piece, there's going to be waves of this visionary encounter. And the first wave is the wave of the storm. You can almost picture it, right? If you're sitting by a river and you see this kind of cloud and lightning and thunder and there's darkness and you can tell the rain is coming and the wind starts picking up. He's watching this storm roll in and then you realize This isn't just a storm that's rolling in. It's coming out of the north, and it's this immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. And the center of the fire looked like glowing metal. The storm is transformed into an Exodus 19 moment. When I say Exodus 19, what I mean is whenever Israel comes up on Mount Sinai, and it says that the people gather around, they've been preparing, they've been consecrating themselves. And then when they show up and God shows up on top of the mountain, how does he show up? Well, it looks like a cloud, and it looks like lightning, and it looks like thunder, and it looks like fire. It's all of these things from Exodus 19. This is an Exodus 24 and 25 moment. What I mean is, this is after they get the 10 Commandments. And they're like, are you going to keep these? And they say, yes, we're going to keep these. And so to charter the covenant together with God, Moses, Nadab, Abihu, Aaron, like the priest of Israel and the elders of Israel, they go up onto Mount Sinai and they start having a meal with God. And the meal with God, it's this communion. It's the first communion meal for Israel as a nation. And they start seeing this translucent platform where they get a window, as it were, into the heavenly realm. And they start seeing the footstool of God. And they realize that they're here communing in a divine spiritual realm, not just a physical one. They're not just on a mountain, they're on God's mountain. And there's fire and there's lightning. It's like all of these images. And so Ezekiel is here by the river in Babylon, and he starts seeing the Sinai stuff. But he's 1,000 miles away over in Babylon. The second wave, it says, in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. If you were here last week, we talked about these living creatures. Later on in Ezekiel chapter 10, he's going to say, I realized that they were cherubim. These living creatures. Living creatures is a word from Genesis chapter 1. Whenever the Lord, he makes living creatures. So he makes like cattle, and he makes like lions, and he makes like the creatures of the air, like eagles. And so what Ezekiel sees is 4 of these composite hybrid living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but what he's about to describe doesn't look anything like a human. It's more like their core was human. But each of them had 4 faces. That didn't sound very human. And it had 4 wings. That's certainly not human. And their legs were straight, and their feet were like those of a calf, and gleamed like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. And again, are they little hands on the wings? Or are they on arms? Like T-Rex arms inside? I don't know. This is weird. I told you we can't deal with all the weird. All 4 of them had faces and the wings of one touched the wings of the other, and each one went straight ahead, and they did not turn as they moved. So they're these stationary, almost statue, but not statue. These are living creatures with 4 faces and 4 wings. He's going to talk more about them. The faces look like this. Each of the 4 had the face of a human being. The human being is looking forward. On the right side, each had the face of a lion. On the left side, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. All right, human, lion, ox, eagle. These are really important symbols in the ancient world, but as best I can tell, what he's doing is saying the top of the class of the sky creatures. We have a representative. The top of the class of the domesticated creatures, we've got the ox. The top of the class of the wild creatures, we've got the lion. And then the top of the class of all of them, we've got the human facing forward. Such were their faces. And they each had 2 wings spreading out upward, each wing touching that of the creature on the other side, and each had 2 other wings covering its body. So there's still, despite their majesty, just like we saw in Isaiah 6, there's still this modesty where they have to cover themselves before the holy, holy, holy God that they're accompanying. With the 2 other wings, they're covering its body, and each one went straight ahead. Look at this. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go, without turning as they went. This is interesting. You're seeing these composite creatures that have multiple faces, and there's multiple creatures, but then there's one Spirit that's guiding them. It's singular. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go. And it's almost like they don't even have to flap their wings, although we're going to see them flapping their wings later. And when they flap their wings, it sounds like a hurricane. It sounds like that train on the tornado that's flooding. It sounds like an army that's marching. He's going to say all of these things. But that's not actually what empowers this group. They are empowered and they are moved by the Ruach, the Spirit of God. The appearance of the living creatures was like burning coals of fire, or like torches. And fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. This word lightning is the modern Hebrew word for electricity. It's just like, you can picture it, right? It's just extraordinary light and brightness and shining and just flashes and burning. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it, and the creature sped back and forth like flashes of lightning. So in Isaiah's vision, he's seen similar things, but it's all stationary. But when Ezekiel sees it in the storm, he's realizing that with each flash of lightning, the Spirit of God is just moving. Wherever the Lord wants to go, the Spirit takes him there. It's an incredible scene. Here's some kind of archaeological discoveries. We found these, humanity has found these, in ancient Babylon, in ancient Phoenicia, in cities like Tyre. We found these in Egypt. This is just, it seems to be how ancient people in that area, they understood these creatures. These are composite kind of animal hybrids. And we see them all across the cultures, and what they represent is like a window into the spiritual world. So like the Sphinx is sort of like this, but these are more cherubs. Do you see where they have like animal feet, a different type of animal core? They have wings, and sometimes they'll have a human face, or you like flip it around. But it's always this composite. So let me give, this is the Bible Project's picture of what we're looking at. We're about to look at the top half in just a second. But the four faces, the wings that are covering themselves, and some wings outstretched. And what Ezekiel says in chapter 10, verse 20 is, he says, later on when he sees this vision again, he realizes that the living creatures that I had seen in chapter 1, I realized that they were cherubim. And Ezekiel knows cherubim because cherubim are all over the temple where he was supposed to be able to serve as a priest on his 30th birthday. Cherubim were these animal hybrids, right? So you got wings, you got ox, you got lion, you got human, but they're also this divine transportation system. So this is Psalm 18. If you just want to go read Psalm 18 sometime. Like he's on the run, as Kelsey said, as he often is. He's surrounded by his enemies. But God keeps showing up in a special way to rescue him. And how does God show up? He says, God got on his cherubim chariot, and he flew to me in the desert, and he rescued me from my enemies. So it's not that God was literally, I don't necessarily think, far be it from me to say what God is or isn't doing. So I think they're meant to be these symbolic pictures of this spiritual realm of spiritual beings. The reason I'm not taking them all that literally is because every time these animal hybrids show up, they're a little bit different. So Isaiah 6 is a little bit different than Revelation chapter 4, which is a little bit different than Ezekiel chapter 1 or chapter 11, which is a little bit different than, sometimes they have 2 wings or 4 wings. The seraphim in Isaiah 6 have 6 wings. It's like, maybe there's just a bunch of these. And I'm actually really open to that, given what we see in Daniel chapter 7, where he meets the Ancient of Days, and it says there are 10,000 upon 10,000 surrounding the throne of God. So it's this amazing scene of animal hybrids who provide divine transportation, but their core function is to be guardians of like sacred space, of sanctuaries. They're guardians. You remember the Garden of Eden. What does he put there with a flaming sword that's going back and forth? He places, the first time we see this word, he places cherubim there. In Israel's temple, they have, on their Ark of the Covenant, they have cherubim with outstretched wings. When King Solomon builds the temple, it says that he commissioned from Phoenicia. He actually got a guy who specializes in making these things to come in from out of town, and he has these huge statues built of these things all over the temple grounds. In the temple itself, in like the holy place, the curtains are filled with pictures of these cherubim. So from the most holy place to the holy place to the temple courts and the carvings and the statues, this is a really familiar scene for Ezekiel. What this means is that God's nearby. His guardians are here. Somehow in Babylon, he's not seeing pictures of Babylonian like images. He's seeing these scenes of cherubim that he's really accustomed to. And so we've looked at the bottom half here, but now as the waves of the storm meet the living creatures, now the waves of the scene continue. It says, as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparkled like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. And as they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the creatures faced. And the wheels didn't change directions as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome. It's like, did you know this was in the Bible? Like, we're complimenting rims? Okay, the rims were awesome. And all 4 of the rims were full of eyes all around. Now, some people say, like, the eyes here are about the omniscience and the kind of the all-seeing God, and that's probably true. He is certainly that. But some scholars are saying, like, the eyes here are actually like the eyes of cut gemstones. So it's just, like, brilliant, sparkling. Like, these rims are really awesome. That's, in other words, like, these are, they upgraded to the bling mode of these rims. They are blinging rims. All right. When the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved. And when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. Wherever the Spirit would go, they would go. Remember, multiple faces, multiple creatures, multiple wheels, one Spirit moving them. The wheels would rise along with them because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And when the creatures moved, they also moved. And when the creatures stood still, they stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. And spread out above the heads of the living creatures was something that looked like a vault. In Genesis 1, this is the word rakia. It's the firmament. It's like the ceiling of the cosmos. It's that blue sky. It's that Exodus 24, wherever they go and they see that translucent pavement where they can see a window into the divine world. There's this vault, sparkling like crystal and awesome. Under the vault, their wings were stretched out one toward the other, and each had 2 wings covering its body. And when the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings, like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. And when they stood still, they lowered their wings. It's just like all of the divine images of when God shows up are somehow showing up in this little chariot mobile. I say chariot mobile. In Jewish kind of literature, there's this, it's on Wikipedia, Merkabah mysticism. Merkabah mysticism. It's just chariot mysticism. And there's this movement in ancient Judaism and in Christianity where when people want to get like a vision or encounter the Lord in an imaginative prayer or reflective prayer, they start praying through Ezekiel 1. Communities of people for thousands of years have been praying this text. There are many rabbis who actually say, we don't need anyone under 30 to read this text. It's like, if you're under 30, just close your eyes, close your ears. You need to be aware of the kind of magnitude of what this text can do in your prayer life. This is where you encounter the Lord. And so this chariot mysticism is about reflecting on what God's presence looks like when it actually shows up in visionary encounters. And so it looks like a storm. Looks like these living creatures, but the living creatures, all they're doing is holding up a platform. And then on top of that platform, there came a voice from above that vault, that translucent firmament, and over their heads, and they stood with lowered wings. And above the vault, over their heads, was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli. Some translations will say like sapphire. It's like brilliant blue. And high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. Now, this is wild for one of the most extraordinary encounters anyone has ever had with God that's put down in writing. It's in our scriptures. Like this is in the scriptures. And somehow the appearance of God is described as a man. Now, certainly God isn't a man. And actually, Genesis 1 says that man is made in the image and the likeness of God. Ezekiel uses that word likeness here. It's a figure like. That's the word likeness. Except instead of saying that we're made in the likeness of God, it's saying like somehow when I saw the one on the throne, he had the likeness of a human. And of course he does. Like, we're made in his likeness, and of course he does, because as we'll see, this is all pointing somewhere to someone who's sitting on the throne today. So, on the throne with a voice, he says, I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down he looked like fire and brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. Are you seeing that this is a pretty extraordinary picture of the one who sits on the throne? I want to read a passage from Revelation. He says, I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And among the lampstands, there was someone like the Son of Man. That's human. He was dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. His head and hair were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were blazing like fire. His feet were like bronze, glowing in a furnace. His voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance, and when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. And then he placed his right hand on me and said, don't be afraid. I am the first and the last. He's the Alpha. He's the Omega. He's the beginning and the end. So there's this resonance. Every time you start stepping into this scene, you start getting pictures like this of this brilliant one who sits on the throne, who's enthroned above the cherubim in all his awesomeness. And then Ezekiel says, this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. The appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. He's not totally willing to say this was God. He's not even willing to say this was the glory of God, or even the likeness of the glory of God. This is Christopher Wright in his commentary. He says, only now, it seems, does Ezekiel almost blindingly realize what he's looking at. This is no Babylonian deity attended by its royal guardian sphinxes. This is none other than Yahweh himself, very much alive and well and still on the throne. Yahweh is here in Babylon. And the shock of the realization drains the last dregs of adrenaline from Ezekiel's trembling body, and he collapses face down, unable to look any longer. But had he really seen Yahweh? No, he will not claim that. Had he seen the glory of Yahweh? Even that would be too much to claim directly at this stage. Later, he will recognize it more easily. Nothing will ever be more significant for Ezekiel than this encounter with a living God. His whole life and message will be more uncompromisingly God-centered than any other prophets. Yet all he can bring himself to say at this point is, this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God. He meets God in Babylon, the last place he expected to find him. This was the appearance, and then he says, when I saw it, I fell face down. You remember John in Revelation, he says, I fell face down as though dead. But actually, when Peter meets Jesus, you know what he does? He says, I fell face down and I said, I am a sinful man. Like this is the response of encountering the God who is holy, holy, holy. It's of total surrender, dependence, and humility. There's nothing we can do to even stand before him. But this is just the beginning of Ezekiel. This is actually going to set up this core tension of how did the glory of the Lord show up in Babylon, and what's he doing back in Jerusalem? Is God with his people as they're scattered? So this is the introduction that's setting the tension, and I think the tension is one that resonates with us. But we see the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh, and the first sign of this appearance is transcendence. John Taylor, he says this, I think I've got it up here. No? He says, the vision of the Lord riding upon his chariot throne typified this sense of otherness and majesty. Last week we saw it. It's holy, holy, holy. It was unutterably splendid, mysteriously intricate, superhuman, supernatural, infinitely mobile, but never earthbound, all-seeing, all-knowing. This is how God revealed himself to Ezekiel, not by propositions regarding his character, but in personal encounter. God is just bigger and higher and above everything. When Ezekiel meets God, he meets a God who is totally transcendent, but he also meets God who is totally sovereign. There's a royal guardian who's protecting his throne. And he sits on the throne, and he doesn't have to move a muscle to get around. Wherever the Spirit wants to go, he goes. He commissions the wheels, he commissions the wings, he commissions the living creatures. And as he wills, it happens. He is in total control and in absolute sovereignty in this scene. But he also is in this glorious presence. What I mean by presence is something more than his omnipresence. This is his manifest presence. He is showing up in a special way. He is there with him. Yes, God is everywhere and God is in charge. He's transcendent, he's sovereign. But here we see that God is here. He is here in a special way. In all his kingdom and power and glory, Christopher Wright says, that has arrived in Babylon. And no border guards can keep him out. No place on earth is barred to the throne chariot of this God. He was there. And so the false prophet can go in and they can talk about God. But the true prophet, the true man of God here, he steps into the presence and he comes out indelibly marked with the glory of the Lord. He's there with God. The fourth mark of the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Yahweh is judgment. And this is the total surprise. It's the kind of misplaced judgment of Ezekiel's expectations. The vision here, and really through 11, it makes it clear that the mood of his presence is actually one of continuing judgment. That when this chariot shows up, unlike Psalm 18, when like the Lord hops on his chariot and he flies down to rescue David, this God hops on his chariot and he flies down in an act of judgment against his people. And Ezekiel is commissioned as a prophet of this news. His commission happens in chapter 2 and chapter 3. We're not going to look at it today. And then his judgments happen in chapters really 4 through 10. But then at the end of them, Ezekiel becomes really confused. And he's really asking a couple of questions. This is one of them. This is how Tim Mackey puts it. He says, what is God's glory doing in Babylon? So the first question of this tension is like, all right, if that glory and transcendence and sovereignty, in presence and judgment, is moving and showing up here, how did that happen? And he's totally kind of floored. He's confused by this. And it seems that this is Ian DeGuid. He says, God is not dead or sleeping, nor is he restricted to the temple. On the contrary, he is living and active and on the move. The Lion of Judah is restless. Such a depiction of the Lord's coming to intervene in the lives of his people, you would think it would be positive. However, in this case, it doesn't bode well for the people in Jerusalem. It's only a short step from Ezekiel 1, our text, where the glory of the Lord is in motion, to Ezekiel 10, where the glory abandons the temple, leaving it defenseless against the Babylonian invaders. So the question is, how did he end up here? And the answer is because he left there. He left Jerusalem, he left the temple, and he's made his way over here with the exiles. So the question can be rephrased. Who is the true remnant? And let me just talk about remnant. You've probably, if you've been around church, you know of the word remnant. Remnant is connected to the people who remain. And it's like the remaining few who are entrusted with all the promises of God. And so God in his judgment is going to exile his people, and he's going to destroy his city, and he's going to do a restart, but it's not a total restart. He's starting with someone small. Sometimes it'll be pictured like in Isaiah as like this vineyard, and he's going to start with a vine, a small thing. Sometimes he's going to look, and you're going to see all the trees cut down, and somehow out of the stump, there's going to be this new life. All of those are themes of remnant. And the people here in Ezekiel's times are asking, who's the true remnant? And the people in Jerusalem say it's us. Nebuchadnezzar came in, just like the prophet said, and he took out all the wicked people, and he took them over to Babylon, and we're still here. We're still here. We have God's presence. We have God's blessing. We have God's glory. We're the remnant. God's going to do a thing through us. We didn't have to change a thing from what we were doing. Keep it as is. And not only did we not have to change a thing, all these wealthy people that Nebuchadnezzar took over to Babylon, there's a bunch of empty houses now. Let's move in. It's like they've been disinherited. We get their land. We get their houses. God has canceled his promises on those people who he took far off, And he's given those promises to us. Here's how a couple of scholars say it. John Taylor. He says, the voice of orthodoxy, like the guys who were in the know, they spoke clearly and logically. The exiles had departed from the holy city. They were on foreign soil. They were unclean, God-forsaken. And those who remained in Jerusalem were the righteous ones and were the recipients of all God's favors. On the grounds that possession is 9/10 of the law, DeWitt says, they regard the de facto situation as an expression of God's favor on them. We're here because God blessed us. You're over there because God condemned you. So they think of themselves as the true remnant, while those in exile are under judgment. Christopher writes, such then was the view of the situation from the perspective of some circles in Jerusalem. But what was God's view? God's answer shows up in Ezekiel 11. And it first of all simply contradicts the Jerusalem opinion. The exiles are not lost to history and the future. They are scattered, yes, but they will be kept safe. God himself will be a sanctuary for them, which is a remarkable irony in the immediate context of the destruction of the physical sanctuary in Jerusalem. So this question of who's the true remnant, who is God with, who is God blessing, it's not that he's blessing the people in Jerusalem. Instead, it's that God is blessing the scattered in exile. It's guys like Ezekiel on his 30th birthday on the river Kabar, who are surrounded by scorpions in chapter 2, and they've got these thorn bushes, and it's like this anti-Eden. Somehow God is there. That's the remnant. And so Ezekiel, he's confused because he keeps announcing judgment on Jerusalem. And he says, God, are you going to destroy the whole remnant? Chapter 9, he says it. Chapter 10, he says it. Are you going to destroy the whole remnant? And then by chapter 11, he realizes, oh, we're the remnant. We're the people that God is protecting, that he's created a sanctuary for. He took us out in order to sustain us and to protect us, to make a refuge, to be with us, so that he could come in his chariot, step away from the city, and watch its destruction. It's a total reversal of expectations. Far from being the outcast of Israel, the exiles had become the true Israel. And the proof that the exiles were God's people is drawn both from what God has done for them and from what he promises. Even while they were scattered among the countries, God had been to them in small measure a sanctuary, making up to them for the lack of a temple and sacrifices by being the protection and their source of strength. This is how Ezekiel 11 says it. He says, Son of man, your brothers who are your blood relatives, they're the whole house of Israel. They're those from whom the people of Jerusalem have said they are far away from the Lord. This land was given to us as our possession. Therefore say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Although I sent them far away among the nations, and I scattered them among the countries, yet for a little while I have been a sanctuary for them. I have been a sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. De Guid, he says, the ones who seem like the offscouring, the ones who seem like the leftovers, those who seem to be abandoned by God and sent off into exile are actually the ones with whom the future of God's people rests. For God has not simply departed from Jerusalem, he has departed to the exiles to be their sanctuary. Because God is with them, they have a future that will bring them back to the land of promise to receive the goal of the promise, God's dwelling in the midst of his people. And it starts while scattered. So he says, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will gather you from the nations. I will bring you back from the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you back the land of Israel again. They will return to it and remove all its vile images and detestable idols. And I will give them an undivided heart, and I will put a new spirit in them. I will remove from them their heart of stone, and I will give them a heart of flesh. This is the great promise of Ezekiel 36 that's still to come in the future. Reed preached on it 2 months ago. Then they will follow my decrees, and they will be careful to keep my laws, and they will be my people, and I will be their God. I've got good news for people in need of respite, in need of safety, in need of sanctuary. The Lord is the sanctuary for the scattered. The Lord is the sanctuary for the scattered. Remember all those areas where you might feel this. Can you bring them back in? We just spent a long time in Ezekiel 1 and 11. Let's go back to you for a second. Like transitions and decisions and health and finances and pressures. Maybe it's physical safety. Maybe it's relational safety that you're after. Maybe there's some kind of insecurity that just keeps coming up. Where are you needing sanctuary? Sometimes when we live in a fallen world, like Hunter was praying, we're just overwhelmed by the brokenness and the death and the loss and the violence and the sickness. And for people who are scattered, for exiles, living as strangers in the land, the Lord is the sanctuary for the scattered. It's when David is at a loss, surrounded by his enemies, over in a cave in the desert, that he's like, God, you were my shepherd. You were always with me. It's like, the one thing I desire is to gaze upon your beauty and to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I want to be in your sanctuary. You are my sanctuary. You're my refuge. You're my strong tower. You're my strength. You're this hedge of protection. Wherever I go, you go, right? As we just sang. It's like, all I need is you at the table, even if it's a table before my enemies. That's enough. Where the Lord is, that's the protection. And so all of these problems, in the midst of the people and the places, in all their brokenness, all of the problems that are there do not overcome the promises and the presence of God. God goes with his people into the scattering, into the brokenness, into the exile, into the loss, into the hardship, over into the exile encampment on the 30th birthday as you're mourning what could have been with your life. The Lord shows up. He's there. He has not overlooked you. He has not forgotten you. His promises are still true. They find their yes and their amen in the one that this text points to. I just want to talk for just a second about how the Lord is our sanctuary. I think in this text we see that where the Spirit wants to go, he goes. This is John, right? The wind blows where it wishes. John 3. The Spirit gets to do what he wants to do, and sometimes the Spirit will leave a place where you thought he would be forever. And he shows up in a new place in surprising ways. And where the Spirit wants to go, he goes. And we are the people who just are trying to follow his lead. Where he leads me, I will follow. I'll go with him all the way. And so I think right now for our church, this is a word. That the Spirit will move where he wants, and all we're doing is trying to follow his lead. That's it. I don't think that this season of Oikos Church is a message of judgment. Our scattering, our insecurity, our losing our gathering place. It is not a message of judgment or condemnation. I think it's a promise of presence. And I think just like in Ezekiel 11, where he's like, I've actually got something for you to learn in this season. I've got a fresh working of deep transformation on your heart that I want to do. I've got a soft heart. I've got a new spirit that I need to. You have transformation to learn. What is it, Lord? It's like that the people and the places aren't it. It's my presence. I want you to focus on this. I want you to focus on me. I am your sanctuary. Don't get comfortable. When the Spirit starts moving, he often is breaking down these barriers and kind of the status quo, and he starts working in a fresh way. And we want that. Wherever he wants to go, he's going to go. Our job is to just follow his lead. And as he steps out with his presence, we're trying to catch up to his presence, and his presence is moving with us, all of that. His promise remains that he says, I'm going to gather you and I'm going to give you a place. And the truth is, he may not give us a gathering place here and now. He's not assured us of that. I haven't heard from the Lord on where or what or when. And if you have, just write it down on one of those things and let us know. But he has these promises that he is gathering a people that he is going to be with, and that's enough. The Lord is the sanctuary for the scattered. What more could we ask for? So we go with him into this place. And I just think that is absolutely where we want to go. So, leftovers, off-scouring, abandoned exiles, people in hospitals, and people at the banks trying to figure out the money, and people trying to get the apartment, or people enduring loss and hardship, or people at the funeral home in death, people with betrayal and breakdown. And it's just like all the mess of the sinfulness of this world, the Lord is the only sanctuary where the true promises can sustain us. Every other problem can touch the people. Every other problem can touch the place. But he's untouchable. He is holy, holy, holy. I want to close with a reflection on Jesus as the true fulfillment. So, Ezekiel 10, we're not going to look there, don't worry. He sees all the same stuff, except instead of his visionary experience in Babylon, he sees it happening in Jerusalem, where the same living creatures have the same throne and the same one sitting on the throne, except it all lifts up from the temple and it moves outside the temple. And then it moves outside the walls of Jerusalem. And it's where he's seen the presence of God come to him. He's seen the absence of God leave his temple. But then it says that chariot, it comes and it settles on the mountain east of town. And we need to think about this for a minute. It's also subtle here. But the mountain east of town is a mountain that's called the Mount of Olives. And here at the Mount of Olives, the glory of the Lord comes and waits. It waits, yes, for the destruction of the temple, yes, for the destruction of the city, but really what it's waiting for is the true presence of the glory of God to come back at the Mount of Olives. And so we were just singing about just to be at his table, that's good. So go back to that Last Supper, right, at the table. And it says that when they had finished dinner, they sung a hymn and they went out to the Mount of Olives. And there Jesus commits himself to prayer. And he's weeping through the night. Not my will, your will be done. Is there any other way? Not my will, your will be done. Father, let this cup pass from me. Not my will, your will be done. And what the Lord sees is this God of judgment is also this God of mercy and intervention. And as the glory of the Lord had waited outside of town for judgment to come, now the glory of the Lord in the face of Christ shows up with tears in his eyes, weeping over the city. But he's not just weeping over what's going to happen to them. He's weeping because he knows that he's going to take on what's happening to them. And so in the Mount of Olives, he experiences sweat as blood. He's overwhelmed. He's anguished. He's grieved. He's betrayed. He's struck. He's arrested. He's off-scoured. He's abandoned. He's exiled. And then from the Mount of Olives, the glory of the Lord returns to his city. In cords tying him together. Where then through the night, he endures the judgment of God on a sinful people. And it's amazing. Through that night, the next day at his crucifixion, his body is then taken off and it's put into a tomb. And then, on that Sunday, he walks out of the tomb and he returns to the Mount of Olives as the presence of the glory of God, no longer on the cherubim, but walking among his people. This is the one who's seated on the throne. This is the true sanctuary. And this sanctuary gets you. He gets me. He gets my dad and my mom. He gets stuff with friends and finances. He gets it all. With tears in his eyes. Like you see that the true glory of the Lord isn't just holy, 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 and other and far off he has become love, love, love in the face of Jesus. So, could we pray and just give him whatever it is you need sanctuary for? Oh God, our rock, our refuge, our sanctuary. You are a house, you are a temple, you are a table, and you welcome us in through Christ. All the promises find their yes and their amen in him. Your promise is to gather a people. Your promise is to give land and a promise. Your promise of sanctuary, of presence. Would you just take a moment and just give Jesus where you need sanctuary, where you're feeling the pain, that sense of exile, where you feel abandoned? Lord, we know no place and no other person can give us the sanctuary our hearts long for. And so would you come in? Would you open the eyes of our hearts? Holy Spirit, we know you're in us, but we want more of you. And if more of you means less of me, take everything. God, teach our hearts that these things, the idols that we cling to, the detestable things, would you give us a new spirit? Would you give us soft hearts? Would you teach our hearts the truth, that those things cannot satisfy? Would you make it real in our hearts where we say, take everything? All of you is all I need. Christ, lead us. A fire and cloud in the face of Christ. The first and the last, would you lead our church? In the season of scattering, would you give us everything we need in yourself? Would you transform us through it? Would you teach us the lessons that we're needing to learn that we can only learn in this time? Would you give us a dependence on you? A flexibility that is responsive to you, that moves where you move, that follows where you lead. Would you give us joy in this surrender and in this movement with you? Not an insecurity of questioning, but a confidence that you are our sanctuary. God, you are holy, 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 and you are love, love, love. We praise your name in the name of Jesus Christ, our King. Amen. Hey, listen, if you need to just share or pray, just make your way forward. I would love to talk with you, to pray with you, and maybe a few others will as well, if there's anything that's really heavy on your heart. God bless you guys.